We'll call to order. This is the City of Belvedere Finance Committee special meeting of December 14th, 2023. Helga or Robert, can you take roll?
Chair McCaskill,
Here.
David Walker,
Here.
Patrick Fader,
Here.
Will Lyon, John Wilton, Sally Wilkinson,
Present.
Peter Mark, and the staff present are Robert Zadnik, City Manager, and Helga Cotter, Administrative Services Director.
Thank you. First item of business is a discussion of the 3-year pension funding review.
So thank you, Chair McCaskill and Finance Committee. The first item before you this afternoon is the 3-year pension review. As part of the pension reform approved by City Council in April of 2021, is the review of the pension funding formula every 3 to 5 years to review progress toward full funding of the city's unfunded pension liability within 20 years. The city has contributed a total of $2.1 million to the Section 115 Pension Trust since mid-2021. However, the unfunded pension obligations have reduced slightly over the past 3 years from 7.3 to 7.7 million. This is in part a result of the poor performance of the Section 115 Trust, but primarily because CalPERS lowered their discount rate by 20 basis points to 6.8%, which increases the accrued liabilities. Based on the results of the 3-year review, the city should continue to contribute the budgeted $300,000 per year and will achieve its full funding goals by fiscal year 4041 based on these reasonable assumptions. If the city makes an additional one-time payment to the Section 115 Trust, it could achieve full funding sooner.
And we'll open, are there any public members, Robert? Okay, if someone shows up, let us know. Otherwise, we won't ask for public comments. So we'll open it up to a discussion of the Finance Committee.
I think that the in-depth review 3 years ago was appropriate, and pensions are very long-term, and the status has improved. And Sally and I discussed this, and it seems like it's just fine and doesn't need any additional amount. It's important that the 300,000 go in every year to the 115, and it is.
Patrick, any comments? Sorry.
No, the only, I mean, as David and I discussed this, and the only thing I guess that was surprising, but it's just purely based on the start point, is that the average time-weighted return of CalPERS has shifted dramatically just because they've had some very good years recently. And so we're assuming a discount rate of 5.8%. And if you look at their 5-year or 10-year average return, it's quite significantly outperforming that assumed discount rate right now. But we all know from experience, it just takes one bad year and that shifts again. So I mean, my sense, and I think Dave and I'd agree, that 5.8% feels very reasonable and conservative right now. And I don't feel there's enough evidence to want to shift that in either direction. And that we're prudently funding the pension Section 115 right now to achieve full funding in 17 years' time.
Okay.
Yeah,
With a lot of uncertainty, of course.
Yeah, and I would just add to that we noted 3 years ago that the 115 can only be used for pension, but it can be used for current expenses. So if you end up with a 7.5% return over the next 20 years and you're overfunded, the 115 money is still available to defer current pension costs.
Right.
Or to fund current pension costs.
Okay.
And the only other piece of this, and it's a long way out, can you remind me, how long is the remaining term on the lease back? Because we shortened the term of that as well now. Is it 10 years left? Because the only thought about that is that costs us a couple of $100,000 a year now to fund that, to pay that off. And so at a certain point in time, we're going to be also releasing a few $100,000 a year once that is paid off, but it is a number of years out.
Chairman Caskell, we do have one guest phoning in. I'm assuming that might be Will Lyon. Let me allow him to talk.
Yes, hello. Hi, it is Will Lyon. Thank you.
You
Hey,
bet.
Will, welcome. We're
Yeah,
just on the
sorry
first
for-
agenda item now, talking about the pension funding review.
Yep, perfect. Thank you.
I think it's 2030.
Okay. So that will be, as we do that analysis next year, if we do have long-term budget finances, that's just something to bear in mind, where we will be releasing some cash in 7-8 years' time. But it's a pretty benign review to me. It's better than I expected it to be.
Mhm.
So I think we're in good standing right now.
Okay. Certainly, I support the idea of us continuing to make a 300,000 per year trust contribution. There were 4 recommendations, which at least one of them we probably need to talk about the next agenda item before we can talk about the one-time payment from excess reserves. But there was, in addition to those 4 bullet point recommendations at the end of the memo, there was in the memo another question. It said, it is unclear if the city can improve the timing of its contributions going forward. Still, the Finance Committee could explore this, and CalPERS has offered to assist in any analysis. This may be more, Will, in your in your area of expertise, but my experience has been no one can second guess the market, but what some organizations do about the timing is don't put all your money in at once. Put it in every 2 months and spread it out over a 6 or 1 year period.
And that's what we do already. I mean, I don't know whether you remember, but the 1.5 went in at 100,000 a year, was it?
It was.
100,000 a month, sorry. And then the 300,000 goes in once a quarter.
It goes in July.
Oh, the whole
beginning
300
of
goes in?
300.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Well, going back to look for, talking about the poor investment performance thus far, the explanation from CalPERS is that the timing of the city contribution was suboptimal, which seems a little strange if we spread it out over how many months?
15 months.
15.
But I think they,
So,
I think
I
that,
mean, what did they want us to do?
Well,
Wait 15 years?
no, I think it was pure luck. It happened to go in on the day of the month when there happened to be a market downturn, a tick down that day. And we just,
But that will have just been
Statistic-
one piece.
no,
of-
we statistically were very unlucky if you look at the monthly performance, but
every
that
month
can't,
We chose the wrong day.
but that can't sustain. I mean, anybody knows you put it in long enough and you sit with it, you're going to be fine.
Yeah, yeah.
So I didn't know that all 300 went in, so I don't know whether David has an opinion on whether, because I don't think he likes doing this stuff, whether he has an opinion on whether we should spread that out more, whether it's,
I'm a fan of dollar averaging, and putting it all in at one point seems a little strong. I don't think it's a huge matter, but if you did it semi-annually or quarterly, if it's not an administrative burden, probably not a bad idea.
is that easy?
I can do that.
Yeah.
That's
But
easy.
that is what we were doing, is it not?
Yeah.
Well,
Sorry, go on.
So the 300 was going in as a one-time each July, and then the 100 was going in as monthly when I started.
And the other piece that and I wanted to clarify this, because I forgot to clarify this with you, Helga, is that when we had that 1.5 sitting there, it's still in LAIF, and so it's still earning interest income before it was put into CalPERS. Is that correct? It's just, it doesn't fall into this fund, it just falls into
It just goes in. it
Into
was
interest
in
income.
life, Yes.
So it's not that we weren't making money on it, we just weren't making
yeah,
money on it,
Okay.
here.
Well, so going forward, to make sure our minutes stated clearly, what is the proposal for future funding? How many month do we
So what
spread
month
it?
does it go in right now? It goes in on July 1 or?
In July.
Can we do it quarterly, 75 every quarter?
Sure, I can do that. At the beginning of each quarter?
Sure,
Yeah.
Okay.
that sounds good.
I mean, it
So-
just means that small amount will be earning interest that won't qualify under the 115 for, on average, but I don't think it's not enough to worry about.
Right.
Okay, let's vote on that. When we vote on the other three things, I think we can talk about it, but there's no further discussion. The 3 points under the recommendation was to continue to apply a discount rate of 100 basis points lower than assumed by CalPERS. Second was to continue making section 115 trust contributions of $3,000 per year. And the fourth item was undertake a pension review in 3 to 5 years, plus the timing that we just talked about. Is there a motion that we approve all four of those items?
So move.
Is there a second?
Second,
Can you take a roll call, Helga?
Sure. Chair McCaskill?
Yes.
David Walker?
Aye.
Patrick Fader?
yes,
Will Lyon?
Yes.
It passes. Thank you.
Mhm.
So at this point, we'll move to the second item, which is the review of the proposed allocation of the fiscal year 22-23 excess reserves.
The second item today is to make a recommendation to City Council how to best utilize the fiscal year 22-23 excess reserve. As of June 30th, 2023, the city maintained approximately $850,000 in excess reserves. As part of the revised fund balance and reserve policy, the Finance Committee is asked to make a recommendation whether any portion of the unassigned fund balance should be appropriated for specific purposes. Before you are the recommendations for the allocation of the $850,000 while maintaining the general fund reserve ratio above the 50% threshold throughout the 5-year forecast period. The budget outcomes can vary from what is forecast. Therefore, staff are requesting a $300,000 buffer of unassigned funds to remain in the general fund above the minimum threshold. This would leave $550,000 available for allocation for specific purposes. Staff are recommending the following 5 allocations. The first is staff bonuses of $50,000. City Council authorized the city manager to distribute $50,000 in end-of-year staff bonuses at their meeting earlier this week to recognize staff commitment to Belvedere since 2023 was an unusually challenging year with staff shortages, hiring of new personnel, and a lot of large projects. The second is outsourcing of finance department tasks for $25,000. As part of the annual audit review, the auditor expressed concern about risks associated with a single headcount in the finance department and the merits of outsourcing tasks such as payroll and accounts payable. Staff is working to obtain accounting support services for assistance with accounting, data entry, accounts payable, and researching options for the outsourcing of payroll that best meet the needs of the city. The third is website development for $25,000. The city implemented a new website in September of 2023 as part of the key city council priority for this calendar year. The website is live, but additional work is needed to enhance search capabilities along with uploading of historical records. This is time-consuming work and beyond staff or volunteer time capabilities. And the fourth is the allocation to the critical infrastructure reserve for an amount between $200,000 to $450,000. The critical infrastructure reserve has a balance of $890,000 as of June 30th, 2023. This fund is for ongoing essential infrastructure repairs, maintenance, and improvements. The most current infrastructure need is for the repairs to the Beach Road seawall. There are 2 projects. First is repair the partial sheet pilings installed in 2019 to shore up a section of the seawall, which has begun to rust and may need to be capped with a concrete shell and is expected to cost about $300,000. The second project is to install sheet pilings along a problematic section of Beach Road seawall and is estimated at $391,000. Both projects are not budgeted. and staff is working to determine the recommended order of priority for these two projects. And the fifth is to allocate up to 200,000 to the Section 115 pension reserve. As discussed in the previous item, the committee could recommend to allocate up to 200,000 for a one-time payment to the Section 115 trust to help achieve the full funding of the city's accrued liability more quickly, but it is not an urgent need. And these are the projects identified for this allocation of the 550,000 unassigned balance, and we are available to take any questions.
Okay, assuming there's still no members of the public online, we'll bring it back to the committee for discussion. David and Sally, since you were the authors of these recommendations, let me first kind of capsulize them. There's actually 5 or 6 things that we need to talk about. The first is the request that we leave 300,000 in the general reserve. Second is to increase current spending by 100,000 for staff bonuses and finance department outsourcing and website development. The third is a critical infrastructure reserve, and that's where we'll have a choice between that one and the pension reserve. But David and Sally, do any of you want to add anything to what information is here and or give any additional thoughts about your preference between allocation between the critical infrastructure reserve and the pension trust reserve?
I can say that I focused on the pension. I was asked to be part of this review essentially for the pension, and I'm satisfied with the actions we've taken in that regard. As far as the other portions of, or the entirety of the excess reserve, I don't really feel that I have enough information to, about the city's needs and so forth to speak on that. But with this information that we have before us and soliciting any other comments from staff, I can state a preference. I can do that now or after anybody else has had their questions.
Oh, sure, go ahead.
Well, I think that this 100,000 for these different items for the city hall bonuses and outsourcing and website make great sense. We discussed the outsourcing for payroll and some of these other things at our last meeting, and I think we're all in agreement that that would be a good thing to do. So that makes sense. As far as the buffer, I guess I would probably take that one step further, and after utilizing 100,000 of the excess, I'd probably just leave the remainder as an excess reserve. In 3 months, we're going to be into the budget era. We've already made a determination on the pension, and while critical infrastructure by definition of the word is important and critical, I don't think anything is going to happen there in 3 or 4 months. So as it goes into budget, it might be more clear information and whether it's going to cost this much or something else comes up in the budget process. So I would put forth the idea of allocating the 100,000 and leaving the remainder in the excess reserves. The dollars are fungible. They all earn the same amount of investment return, and consider it in the 24-25 budget.
That would be the entire remaining 450,000.
Yeah, essentially, plus the 300.
Yes,
I mean, it's all going to be in the same spot.
Yep.
Right.
correct. Okay. Sally?
I actually have some questions. Robert, what's the timeline for either of these 2 projects on Beach Road?
Timeline in terms of need or?
Or timeline in terms
To
of
start.
finalization of budget and then in terms of implementation?
Yeah, with either of the projects, we're working currently on which one takes priority, which one's most important. Once we determine that, we'll be able to have a project engineer design a set of plans and make recommendations on what needs to be done there, and then also develop a preliminary cost analysis, a budget for those projects. That's a few months away, I would say. So I, generally agree that, we're not going to be breaking ground on January 1st. We don't necessarily need the money now. If we did want to get a jump on that work I just suggested, it would save us a few months, rather than waiting until this new fiscal calendar year to start working on developing plans for the project.
Can I jump in with a real quick question, Sally? Is that the write-up here indicates that there's still 890,000 in the critical infrastructure reserve project. Is there any reason that those funds cannot be used for these two projects?
No,
So,
And I mean-
so a decision on the remaining 450 would not slow down the
No.
ability to move forward.
No, and I hear, what David's saying in terms of everything being fungible, which is true. And I mean, just historically, the reason this reserve was really established was because we needed money set aside for debt funding purposes, meaning there was too much volatility in the tax stream. And so the financial advisors sort of required us to have a dedicated fund. And so a lot of money has been taken out of it there already. I don't feel strongly about it. My only concern is when things are sitting as excess reserves, people have a tendency to want to spend potentially. And that's not true necessarily this finance committee or this city council, but you could find that people just decide they want to, when they really feel that it's excess rather than focused on specific infrastructure needs, there could be some fuzziness around that. But there is no immediate purpose for this reserve in the way that there was when it was formed, for sure.
Another quick question responding to that, the 890,000 that is presently in the reserve, are not these two projects that would have been done as part of the bigger project?
yes.
So in some respects, an argument could be made that these are projects that were consistent with what was intended when the reserve was first set up.
Yeah. And I don't know, did we officially broaden the definition of that reserve? I just don't remember.
Beyond the Measure D necessarily
Yeah.
project.
Did
I
we do
thought
that when we
did in-
revised the reserve policy? I just don't remember.
I thought we did increase the scope.
But yeah, absolutely, those two projects could be funded from this reserve, and then it will not be completely
Without
drained.
regard to whether we increased it by 450 or not.
And if I may, I agree completely with everything Council Sally just said. Do you say councilwoman or councilperson?
Council member.
Council member, you
Council member, okay, good.
were at the end.
Sorry to show my ignorance. Council member Wilkinson, I agree completely with all that. And I wouldn't necessarily want on a long-term basis, just sort of have excess reserves there. But it seems when you're doing the budget, you have a lot more granular and broad information on the needs. And I'm pretty ignorant about those right at this moment. And staff will be more knowledgeable in several months, and we as a committee will be more knowledgeable in several months.
Can I jump in with another quick question?
Yeah, I have a technical question as well, so you go first.
The two projects, albeit we don't know exactly how much they would cost, I read these to suggest that both of them were critical, that this is not something that we could put off for 5 years. Am I reading too much into it?
No, I think that's accurate. And we're not quite sure at this stage how critical it is, which is why we're going to be spending some time and effort leading up to the budget once it's passed in June or July, or excuse me, in June, better understanding what the needs are and how urgent it is. It may need to be something that we need to jump on in February or March. If that's the case, we'll be coming back to City Council with an urgent request.
So I have a technical question about reserves. So if, for example, if the money is appropriated into the critical infrastructure reserve and then spent, does that still qualify as general fund expenditure, and then the reserves have to be included in the reserve calculation, or it doesn't matter whether it comes through the critical infrastructure reserve or directly out of excess reserves in terms of does it make a difference in terms of the reserve policy?
Good question.
Because if it does, we want to put it in the critical infrastructure, so we're not being required to accumulate extra reserves because of the formula.
I'm not sure the critical infrastructure reserve was one of the reserves that was excluded from the calculation. The general reserve, was it?
It is excluded, isn't it?
It is excluded
Yeah.
from
Oh, it
the-
is, okay.
But when it's spent, does it get appropriated through the general fund anyway?
No,
No.
it gets charged to the
Charged to
critical
the reserve.
Oh,
infrastructure.
so it then is excluded from the reserve calculation. So there is a reason therefore to put money into the critical infrastructure reserve if we believe that we're going to have a number of projects in future years for critical infrastructure.
So I do have the definition. It's the critical infrastructure reserve is available to provide resources for potential future critical infrastructure capital projects in the city, both planned and emergency repair projects. The reserve is designed to reduce the city's future needs for borrowing or bonding on these projects and could also be used as required grant matching funds.
And so if we don't fill it up now or add to it, how long would we have to wait? Is it the next finance committee meeting or when we look at the budget, or would we have to wait a full year until we have this meeting again?
As part of the budget, we could allocate some funds.
To the critical infrastructure fund. And then when we spend from it, it
We
takes
could
it
do
out
it-
of the calculation
We
for
could have a
reserves.
transfer set as part of the budget to go into the critical infrastructure.
Can you refresh my memory? Do we still have any grant applications outstanding for the original project?
We do, we have a very large grant application outstanding, one.
That
One or are there others? There's one that's,
There's really one that's, I think we're taking the most serious right now. It's a grant through FEMA and Cal OES.
for approximately how much?
About 16 million.
And the timing of their decision is?
Well, I've expected to have an answer already, but we don't, unfortunately. And we don't have a schedule from them. It's really dependent on what's happening in Washington.
And if we received all or some part of that grant, what requirements would we then face in terms of matching funding, if any?
we don't know anything yet. So that's this potentially becomes a very big issue if we're very fortunate enough to receive
Fortunate to
that.
get it,
that
but that's a
grant
big
funding,
problem.
Then it's a big problem, and we don't know the extent of that problem because we don't know what the conditions might be and whether we'd be required to implement the entire project because it's a sea level rise grant, or whether we could do just the earthquake piece, and do we immediately need to have prove matching, meaning a new a tax measure. I think we've just decided to cross that bridge if and when we're lucky enough to be in that situation. But it's
Because-
but my understanding, Robert, correct me if I'm wrong, it's very unusual to be given a grant without conditions. They're not just going to go, here's 16 mil,
Right.
have fun.
And our proposal described the whole project, including the transfer tax proposal that we thought would pass.
No, we didn't give that level of detail. The application was put in 2021, so.
But it's for the whole project, seismic plus seawalls.
So an award would likely be, as you suggested, for the entire project. And the question is whether or not they allow, what level of flexibility the city has to try and present a case that we could do phase one now and then work towards phase two in the future.
Got it.
And even if they let us just do the earthquake piece, we'd still have to find a way to raise 6-8 million, whatever the number might be at that point in time, because surely the project's gone up in price just to do the earthquaking.
Okay. Patrick, other questions?
So we've discussed the infrastructure reserve, infrastructure reserve fund. Did you have a comment on the pensions too? Did you want to defer that as well? Or do we want to make a contribution there?
I think, didn't the motion I make include a 0 additional contribution? I think that, no? Oh, I don't think we need to make an additional contribution. That's my takeaway.
Okay. Will, do you have questions or comments?
Probably more for my education. why not make a pension contribution?
Well, the reason I say not to is because the pension plan is a very, very long range project with many assumptions, and it bounces around quite a bit. And so a very long-term view and consistent funding has proven to be the best way to deal with pension. Now, if one of your assumptions is a 7% interest assumption, and over that long term, you actually earn 6%, you've got a very big problem. So without going through the analysis that was done 3 years ago, as you know, the outcome was that we set it at 100 basis points below the 7%, which is now 6.8 and thus 5.8. So we're on track from the good review that Sally and Helga worked up here, and I discussed with Sally. So it just fits into that long-term view. It's more important to make 300,000 additional a year, vastly more important than making a one-time additional 200 or 400,000 now. So stay with the long term and review it every 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, I get it. And so I just wasn't tying it together that we were still doing 300,000, which is that 75,000 going in quarterly.
Yep.
The one thing that,
I-
oh, sorry, Will, go ahead.
No, I mean, it's probably not even worth airtime, but the one that resonated the least with me was the website. But I sort of put it under the heading of helping out our staff, because if it's something that they view as important and is saving their time to outsource that, then it's a good investment. But if you force me, I'd probably say I'd rather put the money behind, bonuses for our staff or something along those lines. I draw less of a benefit from the website and more from, other things.
For whatever it's worth, I was looking at the website a month ago or something, probably in this pension area, and I wanted to look at some old pension reports, and it didn't naturally reveal itself. And so Helga gave me 3 or 4 arcane little steps there to actually find the information. So I imagine part of that work would be to make it a little more user-friendly to get to information.
I mean, we know the website's weak on search functionality, and so we need to have an expert in SEO as well as working with Proud City to make that better, and there's just a price for that. And the point I would make in terms of trying not to burden staff, the remaining work is so boring that any of that we can take away from staff and send to an outside agency, I think would make our staff happy.
It would.
Would it be correct for us to assume that dedicating those funds is in line with what maybe Jane and other council members have felt was needed?
Yeah, I mean, her main complaints are twofold. One, that search doesn't work, and 2, that there's not enough historic record there. And I think they're both extremely valid points. Because I sometimes struggle when I'm looking to find historic finance committee stuff, for example, it's just not there because we've only gone back, I think, 2 years right now. And so we just need an outside person to transfer everything over from our Laserfiche. I think to me, it's money very well spent, because we do legally require I think we've done the minimum that we're required to do in terms of best practice, but we want to go far beyond that.
So on bottom line, it's not funds looking for a project, it's a project that the city council would like to do.
No, and the one, if we're looking at funds looking for a project, which we didn't mention here, is we talked in the past about the fact that we've underfunded the fire department because they've been putting money into pensions that we haven't been funding. So we've got that deferred expense, which we know is going to increase our fire cost in the next few years. We could just pay that off. I mean, that would be a different alternative, of course. It all
You're-
works out.
You're adding that to the list of.
I'm adding it to this now, and I
projects.
don't even remember what the number is, but when you're talking, it doesn't sound like there's a lot of sort of desire to either fund the pension or the critical infrastructure reserve. And if you just thinking about what other needs does the city have, that's the only,
Mhm.
we know fire is a long-term issue for us, but we know we've got that short-term thing, which is going to cause an increase in the next couple of years. But it's all fungible, as David keeps saying, so we're just
Well,
not,
in order not to make this more confusing than it already is, for the moment, say that's not one of the alternatives, because it seems to me that we've got to decide on several things with respect to the last 450,000, and that is David's proposal that it just go into with the other 300,000 and general reserve sit for future determination how it's be used. Arguably, if it's there, it's kind of left up to the city council how to spend it. Obviously, a second alternative is to allocate it some way between the critical infrastructure and the pension. I suppose it seems like an obvious third alternative is that we, since all we do is recommend to the city council, they can make their own determination. I mean, in theory, we could say that the last 450, we believe it should be used for either critical infrastructure or pension trust to be determined by the council at a future time. So that would give the message of the council. We think it ought to be spent for one of these two things, as opposed to just throw it in the pot with the rest of general reserve to spend any way you want to. That seems like those are the three alternatives we need to choose between. Does that sound right to you, David?
Yes. I would just again state that I don't feel, I feel that at the time of the budget in just a few months, there'll be a lot more knowledge on all this. And maybe that's just me, but so it wouldn't be an excess reserve forever.
Unless the council decides to spend it before we meet again.
Well, then we have another problem.
Sally, you got thoughts?
yeah, I mean, I don't know how the council feels, but I think there's a general, we know our two levies are problematic, and we've just certified the EIR for the seismic portion of it. So I have no issue with leaving it as an open recommendation, as long as it doesn't affect the reserve calculation. So, for example, if these projects both came through last year, we could allocate those monies to the critical infrastructure reserve at the time of the budget, so that they don't affect your projections out the following year, because you generally just increase by a certain percentage, if you see what I mean. And that would have increased the reserve requirement, correct?
Right.
So as long as we can do that at the time, then I think that's fine.
All right, so your proposal that we leave it as an open reserve is the same as David's, is that it be lumped in with the 300,000.
So I don't, yes,
The first
yeah.
300,000
I
that's
don't-
staying in the general
I
reserve.
think leave it up to the city council and say you can put it directly in the critical infrastructure reserve if you want, or leave it as excess. We don't, I think I would vote to put it into the critical infrastructure reserve personally, but I think it's fair to leave that up to the city council.
I mean, so that, under your proposal, Sally, it would say that the finance committee would prefer, but it's up to you.
So I'm not the finance, you guys are the finance committee. You need to decide what you think is the right thing for and again, the city, if you feel strongly that it should all be excess reserves, that should be how the recommendation you make.
I mean, it sounds like nobody wants to put additional money in the pension fund. We're all aligned on that.
Yep.
The only question is, should we say 450 goes into the critical infrastructure fund, or we make that decision down the road? I'm fine to make it now and put it into the critical infrastructure fund, but that can wait, so.
So just a reminder, we, as part of the mid-year budget review, we moved 700,000 out of the critical infrastructure. There was 1.5 million in there and we moved 700,000 out back to the general fund. So
Refresh my memory, Helga, that was for what purpose?
it was because we were concerned about the general fund not meeting the reserve limit.
Right, so
Yeah.
it was just, you needed it for our current year spending.
Right.
And it was because we did that weird thing with the reserves where all excess reserves went into the critical infrastructure fund and there was no buffer.
Right.
And so because there was no buffer and we overran, we had to take money out. And in addition to not putting 700,000, taking 700,000 out, we were meant to put 600,000 in as well. So there's a
Right.
net 1.3 that didn't fund critical infrastructure this year.
Right.
Sally, notwithstanding your comment that it's up to the finance committee, you're not a voting member of the finance committee, but you are a member of the finance committee. So I want to be clear to understand your preference would be to put the 450 into the critical infrastructure.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Helga, in terms of how the budget's running so far this year, you're not expecting any other significant calls, correct? So that 300 is going to be a sufficient buffer.
I believe so.
But again, I don't feel super strongly because it doesn't sound like the projects are going to be this year. And so it can be determined at the time of the budget if that's your preference.
Well, I mean, even if it goes into the critical infrastructure reserve, the council can always take it back out again.
Absolutely. And again, this fund was set up specifically for debt financing purposes. And we needed to do that. And we were allocating as much as possible into it as quickly as possible on the basis that it would reduce debt financing costs.
Okay. And Patrick, did I understand you to say you would prefer to put it into recommend that it be put in the critical infrastructure reserve?
Yes, even though we don't know if and when that grant comes through, but I think in case it does, it makes more sense to me to have as much in that designated fund rather than in the general reserve. So if we can squirrel some away now, I would
Okay.
prefer to do it now rather than in 2 or 3 months.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a valid point because if we're lucky enough to get that grant, we are going to have to figure out how to fill the gap. And if we've shown to our community that we've really done as much as possible from the general budget to set aside funds before asking for a tax.
Okay.
I think that would be good.
David, you want to stick with your position of it just going into the general reserve?
Yeah, to be reviewed in the budget in a few
Okay.
months. I do.
Will, do you have a point of view one way or the other? Whether the 450 should go into the critical infrastructure as Sally and Patrick have indicated they would prefer, or just go into the general reserve as David has indicated his preference would be?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I guess I'm influenced by, seeing the recommendation on the page of, adding 200 to 450. And what I thought might make sense was assuming that 691 gets spent reasonably soon, taking it down to a 200K balance, I'd almost be inclined to fund like 300K to take it up to $500,000. I think, as David said, like the labeling of critical infrastructure, I think gives us plenty of air cover for allocating money there. So I think putting a little bit there, I probably would be inclined to do that
Inclined
at
to
this point.
inclined to put the 450 there or something less than the 450?
I had penciled out 300,000, but I'm flexible. I do think the whole setting money aside for the fire issue, I like the idea of setting aside money for that. I mean, of course, we can come back to it at budgeting. I think it's a good signal, though, for us to be setting money aside that it's something important. So I guess tying my comments together, I could see allocating the 450, doing 300 into critical infrastructure and 150K into the fire fund.
Okay, that presents a third alternative to us, but let me cast my vote. But there are 4 of us voting here. Will, you're one of the 4, and we need 3 of 4 to vote on something. I would go along with Patrick and go with the 450, which is also what Sally recommended, although she doesn't have a vote. If Patrick and I are two votes to just go ahead and put the 450 in, with the understanding we can change that recommendation. And this is only a recommendation to the city council. David, you want to stick with your recommendation that go to a general reserve?
I'm a fan of critical infrastructure. If that's the motion, I'm going to abstain.
Okay, now we're down, we're down to 3 votes. Two of us are for the 450. Will, do you want to voice anything else about your preferences? 300 versus 450 to the critical reserve?
No, I'll go with 450, on the belief that money is fungible, and I
Yep.
just, I just as soon allocate that excess right now, and, we could shift it to fire, at some point.
Okay, if there's no further discussion, can I have a proposal for the 450,000 alternative?
Yes, put it towards a motion to put it towards the critical infrastructure fund.
Okay, Will, do you want to second that?
Yes, please.
Okay, Helga, can you take a roll call?
So just for the recommendation, the city council will have the 100,000 for the 3 projects, the outsourcing, staff bonuses, and the website, and then 450,000 to the critical infrastructure. We'll leave the unassigned as the 300 plus the, so yeah.
Yep.
Okay,
Correct. That is the motion.
correct. So Chair McCaskill,
Yes.
David Walker,
Abstain?
Patrick Fader,
Yes,
Will Lyon.
Yes.
That passes unanimously, or
Yeah, no.
with one abstain.
Yep, thank you. Okay, the next item on our agenda is a discussion of the property insurance coverage.
At the last Finance Committee meeting, the question regarding wildfire coverage was raised as it relates to the city's property insurance. In speaking with CIRA, the city's property insurance is an all-risk replacement coverage that includes flood and wildfire. This is a public agency pooled plan with no waiting for individual members if they are in a low or high-risk area for wildfire. The risk is spread across the entire pool, which covers agencies throughout California. Belvedere is considered low risk for wildfire and has a lower deductible of $25,000, where an agency in a high-risk area, their deductible is $100,000. Of the 53 agencies in CIRA, only 6 are considered in high-risk areas. CIRA also has pointed out to us that during wildfires, municipal buildings are usually protected and not allowed to burn. And then we also wanted to give an update on the cost of the earthquake coverage for the levees. An estimate based on the information provided to the broker is $150,000 per year. However, in order to get a more accurate quote, a probable maximum loss report would need to be run. Insurance cost rates are based on estimates of average annual loss and potential total loss in 1 in 250 and 1 in 500-year events. This report will help determine what the total exposure loss could be, as it is the high severity losses that would need to be evaluated. And with that, we can take any questions.
What's the insured value for that 150,000?
While you're looking that up, thank you for clarifying that wildfire risk aspect. That was helpful.
You're welcome. It's 20 million.
Annual premium for the earthquake on the levy?
It would be, it was based on a $20 million project.
And some kind of a large deductible, or did they mention that?
No, they didn't mention the deductible. They just mentioned the annual premium.
But they're prepared to go away and do the additional evaluation if there's any potential interest.
There is, and there was a question that did come up on, what are you insuring? What type of risk, what type of event in the, level of earthquake? Obviously the levees to replace would cost much more than 20 million, I would think. But again, if we're in a serious earthquake situation, the levees aren't going to be completely fractured and have to be pulled out and replaced with brand new ones. So we talked about some of those points, and they were pretty firm on that 150,000. Even after they do the analysis, they said that's a pretty good budget number to consider.
So it would never fund repairs from it's just a significant earthquake. That's the only thing it would cover.
Yeah, I mean, they didn't establish any thresholds of what the definition of significant is. My understanding is that any earthquake would probably be covered under this coverage, but I'm sure that would be in the terms.
But there would clearly need to be an earthquake.
Right.
If the thing just slid down into the water on its own without an earthquake, we're not covered.
Yeah, and Beach Road obviously is the higher risk, in an earthquake. It's a structure that really doesn't have a very good foundation. So, San Rafael Avenue would likely see some fractures and weak points, cracks in the levee. We'd have to patch up and shore those up, but I think Beach Road would be more of a challenge in terms of cost and effort.
How much, once these additional Beach Road projects are done that we were talking about earlier today, what percentage of Beach Road will we think be protected from earthquake?
Yeah, so the stretch that we did in 2019 was about 180 feet. This other stretch that we're talking about, I think, is a little bit longer in the 300-foot range. I'd say it's somewhere around 30% of the levee would be retrofitted after we did those.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, where is that 300-foot stretch?
Yeah, it's just it's that section from, if you're familiar, the motorboat houses that are they're being rebuilt right now or remodeled by Hadley, towards Tiburon. So, and if you want to see the area that we're watching, you can actually see a gap forming in the sidewalk and the curb and gutter. It's widening. So we did a repair there in 2014. And it was noted at the time that, hey, this is a little bit of a Band-Aid. You are going to have to do some more extensive work in the future.
Yeah, towards the drawbridge.
Yeah, correct.
Robert, with those numbers, it sounds like repairing the levee piecemeal or protecting it from earthquake is cheaper than a full-on project. Because you're telling us you've done 30% of the levee with only about $1 million.
Yeah, so, and again, that's something I need to check in with Tony. I want to say he was basing his estimates to repair that shorter section on numbers that we received back in 2019. Today's present dollar, I imagine it'd be quite a bit higher. We were very fortunate in 2019 to find a contractor that was willing to do that for the price they did. Their bid was under 300,000 at the time. The next competitive bid was in the 600,000 and then $800,000 range. So we got a pretty good deal. I don't know if that same deal would be here if we were to bid it out today.
Well, I mean, I just gratuitously throw in that I assume, I mean, there could be several reasons for that, but part of it might just be when you have a really big project, you're throwing in a lot more unknown contingencies than you are when you're just doing a small project. So in fact, that could be the case that you do it piecemeal, you end up with a much lower cost than when you do the whole thing at once, which is a little bit anti-intuitive because you normally think doing the big thing because they get all the machinery here and can do it, but
I think part of it driving maybe some of the lower costs for these sections we're talking about, it's just a wall we're retrofitting. We don't have to splice any connections. And for utilities to those properties on the outboard side, there was a pretty big cost that was carried, when we started working in front of, let's say, the yacht club and some of these other areas.
Mhm.
And when you reinforce just certain sections, does it make the sections in between less vulnerable, more vulnerable, or it has no impact?
Yeah, that's a great question for a geotech expert.
You're not that.
I'll get back to you.
Today? Thank you.
Are there any open questions that this committee?
No, I just wonder what you think of 150,000, whether that sort of makes your head explode or whether that's in something that from an insurance perspective seems reasonable.
Well, putting money in the critical infrastructure fund is somewhat abstract. We have those two potential projects, although they haven't really been looked at closely yet. But if nothing else, it's a piece of information. And I'm not suggesting this, but you could fund 150,000 a year based on that actuary's cost of premium. Now, if you have a major earthquake next year and you don't have the insurance, you've got a problem. How much of a problem? Nobody really knows. But it's another data point in sort of looking at this whole picture. So that's one thing that's informational. As to the value of that premium, the devil's in the details, and and as Robert said, what are they actually covering, and how much of an earthquake, and is there a deductible? And so as far as today's meeting, I don't have any other questions on it. I think it's been worthwhile getting that information, and that's all I have to say.
I've got a couple of questions. Could you repeat again what you said that they would need to do to solidify that cost estimate?
Yeah, so what Tony still needs to work on is putting together a preliminary cost estimate that's a little bit more detail-based, understanding the scope of work, total length, type of materials that are going in, price of those, commodity materials at this time, and availability of contractors. And oftentimes when we start doing projects like this, we'll reach out to a contractor and have them produce a mock bid for us to help us understand where we are in terms of cost.
So they, I can understand why they'd want that information, but we don't have some level of that information already.
Yeah, we have a basic level, which is the budget number that we plugged in. I don't know if I would go to the bank with that at this stage.
Yep.
Obviously before we bid the project, we want to have a more clear defined, refined budget.
We thought we had the best estimate possible until you actually get the construction bids.
Exactly, yeah.
And did the insurers also want to do some further research on what level of earthquake on the Richter scale would cause damage to our levees? Or is that something they didn't, nobody would know that, and so that would not be part of their evaluation of what the cost would be to us for the insurance?
Do you have something?
They didn't indicate that yet, but they still want to know if we have an appraisal on the levies and a recent appraisal. And then they also want to know kind of a value or project value, the age, size, construction type, and the square feet of what we want to insure for the asset.
David, what's running around in my mind is that wondering, is there any benefit to going any further with that would give ultimately the city and the council a better feel for, yikes, a 6.0 earthquake is going to cause a lot of damage. And
When the project was put together, and I think it's probably in the EIR as well, that geotech analysis.
are you reading? Yep.
Sorry, I meant to say that some of that analysis in terms of the level of earthquake required to cause the levees to fail was done as part of the original geotech analysis for the project. So I think we have
We've got that already.
I think we have that already. I think it was a 6.7 and above, which was.
Yeah, and they were
required by-
provided that information. I'm not sure how much time they had to dive into it when they were producing some of these estimates for us, but I would think.
I'm
as-
sorry, you're talking about the insurers now or
Yeah, the insurer. I don't know what level of detail they went into to review all of the seismic analysis and that we provide in the report. So my guess is they gave us a ballpark. It's a conservative number. They said that themselves, and they would probably refine that as they spend more time looking
Yeah.
at it.
No, I was more focusing on a better picture of how much damage would be done. And Sally, you said we already kind of got that. I don't, maybe it's just my fading memory, but I don't recall us quoting a 6.7 earthquake in any of the material that we shared publicly of the community, because to me, that's a little startling. A 6.7 is not that big of an earthquake. If they said an 8 point's going to destroy the thing, I'd say that sounds reasonable. If a 6.7 is going to cause material damage,
Yeah. I'm pretty-
I would be a lot more concerned about our risk going
No,
forward.
and I think that's where they said the levees would move, and you can then look, and there's some statistical sort of probabilities in terms of the likelihood of an earthquake of that size in the next 30 years, and it's like a 70%, but it might not land here, it could land anywhere. And so that's why there's just too much uncertainty. But no, I'm pretty sure, because I think 6.7 is moderate is a cutoff for moderate, and that's where we see the levees move. If it hits,
If it hits here.
If it hits here, yeah.
Although
But-
that if it hits here is not a very specific term, that I don't think,
Right,
is
and
it?
there's so
I
many
mean, we
different
know
fault lines.
there's no fault line that runs under Belvedere Island.
No.
So
But there's
if it hits here, it
4.
has to mean something
Yeah.
2 miles either side of Belvedere or 20 miles either side of
Right.
Belvedere or what.
And it all depends on, which fault is is it a slip type fault? Is there a different
Mhm.
type of, what type of movement is there? It's all it's in the calculation that's in the analysis that's provided. Like Sally said, 6.7, there's a 70% chance or so that that's going to hit in the next.
Before you leave, Robert, David's
Yeah.
got to leave, but I do want to hear one more thing from you. And that is, after hearing all of this, what would you think the appropriate action going forward is to say, that's interesting information, let's file it away, or?
Well, it
somehow-
can be interesting information that you sort of let roll around and not file it away. But in the whole context of critical infrastructure, but my question would be, how big a burden is it? Is it a couple hours, or to get the additional information that the underwriter was requesting? In other words, if it's not a big deal, I'd take it that step, and then we actually get, I presume, like a policy, specimen policy with terms, and you can look and see what you're getting. And again, whether you take out the insurance or not, you're getting more information about this critical infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, that would kind of be my reaction too.
And I would agree with that as well. I think it's a good exercise, even if we don't go down the road and purchase a policy, it's good to know, what the risk is and what it would cost us. It gives us a clearer picture from a management's perspective.
And just to repeat the question, I think David answered, is that something that city staff can do without putting too much of a burden on y'all? And it's also something the insurer is willing to go forward with without any assurance, whether we really want the insurance or not.
Yeah, I can't really say on the second part of your question, but yeah, I think from a staff's level, it's something I'll look into. I'm not going to burden Helga with that. I'll work with Alliant, the insurer, and see how far down the road we can get before the city has to commit either more time and resources
Okay.
to get there.
Sally, Patrick, Will, any of you have further thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, if it's not too burdensome, I think some additional information would be good. But for me, it's the most important is, what type of event, what level of earthquake, what's the coverage,
Yeah.
all those things, what's the deductible, to see financially whether that's something that, does that make that 150 look really big or really small? Because at the moment, it's just a number without any parameters around it.
Yeah.
Patrick?
No additional questions.
Will, any questions or thoughts from you?
I'm supportive of getting more information for those reasons, yeah.
Okay. Helga or Patrick, any additional information on this subject that you want to get from this committee? Or is that sufficiently clear as to where we might want to go?
No, I think I've got good direction.
Okay.
Um,
Okay. Next item on the agenda is discussion of investment reserves. Actually, before we leave that, Helga, the minutes you give us, will you include the information that you shared with us about the fire reserves and so forth in writing? So we've kind of got that.
Oh, sure, I will.
Yeah, that'd be helpful.
For this item, I just wanted to touch briefly on our current banking and investments. We currently have our operating account and payroll account with West America Bank. The accounts are FDIC insured for $250,000 in total for all accounts, as this is based on federal tax ID number. They do have a money market option with an interest rate of 3.5%. The sweep account interest rate is less than 1%. Our investments are with the local investment agency fund, LAIF, through the state of California, which has about 27 billion in holdings. This is part of a larger investment pool, the pooled money investment account, which has about 200 billion in holdings. The average monthly effective yield for LAIF for 2023 ranged from 2.425 in January to 3.843 in November. Our current balance in LAIF is a little over 5 million. Will Lyon and I have been working on looking at different options for our investment. And so one proposal is for CalTrust, which is a JPA established in 2003, which has over 3.1 billion in investments. And it's for California cities, counties, special districts, and other public agencies. The CalTrust has 3 different funds: a liquidity, which has a 5.54% yield, a short-term fund with 4.98 yield, and a medium-term fund with 3.88% yield. And Will and I will be researching this in more depth in the next couple of weeks. And I just want to mention that in my previous agency, we did move from LAIF to CalTrust in order to get a higher return on the investments. So I am familiar with CalTrust.
One quick question while it's on my mind is going back to the original information that you gave us is obviously there was a decision point is how much money we keep at West America versus moving to LAIF or one of these other alternatives. But you mentioned that in addition to the operating checking account at West America, we have the option of a money market or a sweep. Are we presently using either the money market or sweep?
We are not.
Will, since you've been looking at this, maybe that's something you already thought about, but I guess my question is, shouldn't we, that almost seems like a no-brainer. The sweep particularly, because the sweep, they just move money back and forth. But to the extent that we can project out a month or two of what our cash flow needs, does it seem like that we would want to put some of our cash, move some of our cash from checking to a money market that's paying us 3.5, as opposed, I assume the checking is 0% or
It
thereabouts.
is. Yeah, we don't get an interest on our checking.
And they don't give us a credit toward other banking costs that we incur.
They do have an account analysis where they charge us a fee, and it's kind of based on the amount we have in the account over the month. So it's each
But
month.
the loss of that benefit would pale in comparison to either a 1% or a 3.5%
Right.
return.
And we didn't, my understanding is we haven't had a money market because we have the LAIF account. And if we need money, we just move the funds from LAIF to the West America operating account.
I mean, Helga, do you have a view as to whether moving money to LAIF from a purely labor intensive point of view and pain in the rear point of view. Is moving money to Leif any more difficult than just, well, it has to be more difficult than West America just doing a sweep, because they do that without you having to do anything.
Right. But it's very easy to move money from Leif to our operating account. It's an online process and if
It
you do it
involves
be-
a wire transfer, I assume.
No, well, I guess technically it is a wire transfer, but
Or an
you know,
AC, it's an ACH transfer, probably.
It's an ACH and, you know, I log into Leif, I put the amount I want and when I want it to go. And if you do it by 10 o'clock in the morning, it goes that day. Otherwise, it's the following day.
Mhm.
So it makes it very simple to do those transfers. If I'm transferring from the West America's operating to Leif, like when we get our big property tax deposits, then that's you know, I have to call West America and let them know that I've initiated this transfer from our operating to Leif. But I mean, the process is pretty easy. And the percentage we get at Leif is slightly higher than the money market that West America is offering.
Okay.
So-
Now, you and Will are, if I understood you correctly, you and Will are continuing to look at, should we move some or all of the funds in Leif to one of the three funds at CalTrust? And so the same question there, is it going to be as easy to move money back and forth to CalTrust if y'all were to recommend that as it is currently at Leif?
It is, because I've used it previously, so
Okay.
it is easy to move. And the liquidity in the short term, that's same day, and the medium term, it would be, I think it's a 3-day time period.
Okay. Will, do you want to jump in at this point? Any thoughts further that you have, since you're the one that's been looking at this with Helga?
Yeah, I mean, you know, a couple things. Like, first of all, I would not have known about CalTrust were it not for Helga and her experience, you know, in this field. And so kudos to her for surfacing this idea. I think it's our best fit. You know, one other idea that we aren't pursuing, which we heard about from West America, was to buy treasuries direct on treasury.gov, and then as maturities happen, you know, you can reinvest or you can put it, you know, over to the West America bank account. But then all of a sudden, Helga is going to be in a cash management role, and that's not a great use of her time. And, you know, I think the point that I want to learn from her former colleague is, what do we pay for CalTrust? You know, like the quoted rate is 5.5% interest, but you know, what is net to, you know, Belvedere? So that's what we're gonna figure out. And if there's any skeletons in the closet, you know, from you know, the folks that are working with CalTrust right now that they've encountered, just so that we go into it eyes wide open. But it seems like a really good fit, even better than the, you know, money market that that I had surfaced. And so I think it should be a really good outcome. And I guess the final point that I would say is, I'd be shocked if we come to you with a different recommendation than the first pool, which is the shortest maturity pool, which because of the shape of the yield curve is actually paying the most interest right now. So we're effectively, we've got the safest, shortest investment yielding the most. And so I think that's a good spot. And just one final thing would be, it may make sense for us to leave, you know, a few dollars in Leif just to keep that channel open, because we could reach a point in time where things, you know, invert and all of a sudden, you know, we're getting less at CalTrust than we would be at Leif, and so we can switch monies back there easily. But, you know, if it's easy enough to reopen an account down the road, if we wish, we can cross that bridge then. So in any
Okay,
case,
all right, so
I think we're in a good spot.
most of this is probably a subject for future discussions, but just out of curiosity, two questions. Is CalTrust a California, state of California, or an independent JPA?
independent. to
Okay.
kind
And the 5.5% in their liquidity option, is that a guaranteed rate or depending on how the investments do? And if that's the case, what are the investments?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, their rating on S&P is like AAA minus. Their benchmark is the 3-month. I would basically say the collateral
So these are equity investments, not fixed income investments?
no, it's actually basically a money market because it's got a stable net asset value. So the answer to your question is, you put 5 million into it, you get 5 million out of it, because it's kept a stable net asset value. What's going to fluctuate is that interest rate that you earn. But 5.5 is, as good as it's better than I've seen. So I think I think the organization's very specific to working with local agencies. So it feels like a good fit.
Can I just, I haven't looked into either of these two, but I think the reason that CalTrust outperforms LAIF is just they take more credit risk. And so I think it's going to be important just to see what their investment parameters are for the two to decide whether we're comfortable with the type of credit risk that they appear to be taking. And again, I'm literally looking on their websites right now, so I don't know the details of it, but there is some risk there. But obviously, if you're at the very short end of the market, that's probably minimal. But I think it's important for us to
It's
understand.
a good question.
I think it's important to understand what their investment parameters are.
Yeah, agreed. But for the life of me, I can't understand why LAIF is paying the low interest that it is. And, what I've seen is they talk about the type of bonds that they buy, mortgage bonds and high grade corporates. And to be honest with you, it almost seems like the credit risk at LAIF is greater than, at a 3-month T-bill money market effectively. I'm doing air quotes. So it's really confusing, and it's worth asking another time just to make sure that we're not missing something.
Will, do you happen to remember in the last big crash, there were a number of cities down on the peninsula that lost a lot of money. But I assume theirs investment was not at LAIF because LAIF's never had a big loss. I mean, where somebody didn't get any money back because do you remember that? I forget which cities it was, San Mateo or one of them down there lost a ton of money because, does that ring any bells with you, Will? Will, are you still there?
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute. I'm not familiar with the cause of, what caused those.
My recollection is they somehow had investments through the investment banking firm that cratered in New York, but that wouldn't have been through LAIF, I assume.
Yeah, and so this goes back to the global financial crisis?
Yes.
I think it was on their pension obligation bonds. I think they'd taken money and they'd invested it in some really dodgy assets, but.
Well, I guess the only question is, this is all really helpful information, but we're not here to decide anything today, but it will, and Helga, is your intent to bring this back to us at a future time or to do something more quickly than that?
We're going to look into it, and I guess, does the committee need to, I believe the committee needs to make a recommendation to City Council to change the investments.
I mean, I don't feel like we have enough information yet, do we?
Right. No, we don't.
In the interim, is there, I assume that staff could go ahead and in the short term, use either the money market or the sweep account at West America without city council action. Or Sally, would you agree with that or not?
I don't know what our investment policies are there.
I mean, I assume our investment policy doesn't require us to keep us in 0% interest accounts at whatever bank we
Do we
use.
even
So
have an investment policy?
So we did have an investment policy. So the criteria for selecting investments is the safety and risk associated with investments, the liquidity, availability to cash in at any moment in time with a minimal chance of losing some portion of principal and interest, and then the yield.
does it
The
stipulate?
Finance Committee shall review investments and investment performance on an annual basis. The committee's findings shall be reported to the city council through the council person who serves on the committee. The Finance Committee shall also review this investment policy every 3 years and report recommendations to council.
I mean, my,
But that doesn't-
my,
it
my,
doesn't-
my thought would be that since it could be another month or two or longer before this committee decides about CalTrust versus LAIF, is to recommend that staff inform council, unless council objected, that they're going to, some of our monies at West America are going to go into a sweep and or money market fund in the interim until.
I mean, how much is there? There's only a tiny amount in there anyway. No, what's the maximum?
Right, I keep only like around 250,000 at West America in case something would ever happen. And so that's the FDIC insured limit.
Yeah.
So the rest of it is kept in LAIF. So, and that
But
does
it
have
would
a,
be easy for that 250 to be in a sweep.
yes, we could set that up.
And maybe also simultaneously look and see from month to month, you put some part of that into a money market
Right.
because it's still all West America. So I don't think that's an alternative investment decision. It's deciding what kind of account you want to keep your money at our bank.
Right. No, we could do that.
I mean, that would be my recommendation, but
And it-
others might think differently.
Yeah, and I do think the investment policy as you described there, it's not very clear. I think it sounds like it might be an opportunity to actually write a proper investment policy
Yes.
in terms of credit rating criteria and a whole bunch of other stuff and the type of assets that we can invest in. Because, there's $5 million there is not nothing. And so
Right.
I think it might be the right time to properly develop a policy
Okay,
in the next few months.
we can take a look at that.
Which certainly, if we're thinking about putting some funds at CalTrust, I think you'd need to do that anyway. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
But then we bring that back to the finance. When will the finance committee next be meeting? That won't be until the budget or?
So we'll need to do a mid-year budget review, which would be in February.
So
Okay.
maybe that
Well,
can
it's
come
not
out
that
then.
far away. No. Okay. Any further discussion? Will, anything else you want to add at this point on this subject?
No, thank you. I mean, I think we'll just follow up as soon as we can on the cash management piece through CalTrust, and I suppose we're going to have to wait until we get together next time to really implement.
Yeah, although, certainly to the extent that you and Helga can put something in writing as to your thoughts, send it to us earlier, not that we would
Right.
do anything, but it gives us time to digest it.
Okay,
Yeah.
we can do that.
Sounds good.
All right.
And I apologize. I need to scoot at 3:30 here. So
Not a problem. I think we
thank you,
finished
and-
our agenda absent any other new business, which I'm going to assume there's none. So I think at this point, Helga and Robert, unless you have anything, we can say we are adjourned.
Yeah, I have nothing further.
Okay, great. Adjourned. Thanks, everyone.
happy